If budget bills are boring, then why is this one causing an international uproar? Welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number, where we read the fine print so you don't have to. I'm Sarah, and today we're diving into our IssueVoter bill of the month, the Rescissions Act of 2025.
And I'm Stephen. Today's bill comes with a price tag and a body count. So let's dive in.
It actually passed July 18th, and it cuts $9 billion from the federal budget. Now, $9 billion might sound like a fiscal spring cleaning, but in this case, it's actually more like burning the house down.
Yes, absolutely. So it is a relatively small amount of money, which is what we need to keep in mind as we go through this. $9 billion is an enormous amount of money in objective terms, but when compared to the US budget, which is gargantuan, it's a rounding error. Really. So what the bill does is that it claws back unspent funds from Congress. And it's also, though, a calculated shift in US priorities, and the world has taken notice.
So generally what I understand a lot about what's getting taken away here has to do a lot with international aid, development, and honestly, I don't know too much about this whole area, except for the more we invest in other countries, the less we're at risk of them becoming our problem here, whether that be from immigration or maybe bad feelings about the US. It's a good way to keep our reputation to a positive note, which we might not always have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's a massive sea change in American foreign policy. And in fact, Western foreign policy, because America isn't really the only country that's doing that. It's the same in the UK. We're pulling back from international aid. We've in fact just cut our international aid budget, despite the government promising to increase it. And they did that so that they could spend more on defense. So again, that is sort of like the US fault, because you're the guys who said we're no longer going to defend Europe. And so all the European countries are like, oh my God, we need to spend more money. And so to do that, that comes with a huge price tag. So therefore they're saying, okay, well, we're going to cut international aid then, which again is incredibly short-sighted. So if we just take a brief look back at how international aid works, then rich countries have been helping poorer countries for many decades now. Very good reason. One is just a purely humanitarian approach. It's saying, we're very rich. They're very poor. They're starving to death. They're suffering from disease. It's all terrible. Let's help them. And it was seen as being very sort of white saviorish. So there are sort of arguments around this about how, the West shouldn't wade in, because obviously when we help countries like that, we don't just give them money. Generally, we say, and you need to be democratic, and you need to reorganize your institutions, and you need to do this, that, and the other. The World Bank comes in and tells them how to organize their finances and so on. So there are arguments to say we shouldn't interfere in that way. But a lot of what the US aid is doing now is purely focused on that kind of disease reduction, poverty reduction, feeding the poor, that kind of thing, which is really difficult to argue with. And it's been hugely successful. So world poverty, despite what anyone might say, world poverty has declined enormously over the past 60 or 70 years. It's a huge humanity success story, really. For a few years back, for the first time, obesity was a bigger problem in the world than starvation.
Wow.
And so that's a big change to show that we now have more than enough food to feed everybody. And the areas of the world where people are starving has been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So there's now very few places in the world where people are starving to death or at risk of starving to death. And general incomes have been rising, general wealth has been rising, people have more things. And if people have more things and they have more money to spend, they tend to spend it on American goods, because America makes lots and lots of goods, despite what some people may think. And so better economies around the world, richer people around the world, helps everybody. It also means that those countries are less likely to become lawless, are less likely to be havens for terrorism and various discontent and war and all the bad effects that come from that as well. So generally speaking, aid is a good thing, but it's also very important for soft power. So America wants to be a world superpower. It wants to have influence around the world. It wants countries to follow its lead. There's this big battle being played out with China, and China is really taking advantage of these cuts to move into those countries which have now lost US aid and say, hey, we'll give you aid, but of course it comes with a lot of strings.
Right.
Whereas US aid tend to come with fewer strings than a country like China. But then poor countries, if they have nowhere to turn, where are they going to go?
Right, right, right. Yeah, and I feel like this is something that we heard a lot about, generally talked around when Doge was Dogin, and there was a lot of cuts
Yep.
to USAID, these types of things. I mean,
Yes.
let's get into this today. What are the basics here? What even is a rescission, and why are we suddenly hearing all about it?
Yes, well, that's a great question. So I'm sure you know all about the Congressional Budget and Empowerment Control Act of 1974.
I do read that when I am going to sleep, and it is constantly on my mind.
Excellent. That's just what I assumed, just what I assumed. So therefore, if you know all about this particular act, you'll know that a rescission is when the president proposes cancelling budget authority that Congress has already approved, but hasn't yet spent. So under the Congressional Budget and Empowerment Control Act of 1974, Congress has 45 days to approve or ignore the request from the president.
Okay, so it's kind of like returning money you promised to spend before anybody's cashed that check.
Yes, exactly. So presidents used to use this routinely. So Reagan was the rescissionist in chief. He made over 100 rescissions and in fact
Wow.
cut more than 4% from the federal budget using rescissions
Oh.
during his time. And obviously Reagan was a huge sort of tax cutter as well as a huge cost cutter, wasn't he? That was his big thing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's shrink government, let's save money. And so he used rescissions to do that. And then presidents have used it quite a lot. But then after Clinton, it sort of fell out of use, partly because of increased polarization in Congress, meant that it was quite difficult to get these things through, and also just a lot more complex arguing over budgets and so on. Until now, because rescissions have made a comeback.
And that's where I'm assuming Trump enters the chat. So in June of 2025, this summer, he proposed this package of cuts that had already largely been implemented effectively by Doge, you know, good old Elon Musk's Department of Governmental Efficiency. And Congress just made them law. But let's talk about what these cuts actually do. First up is the international aid piece of this, something we have been talking about a lot. But this is 2.5 billion in developmental assistance gone. What kind of impact could that have?
Well, these were unobligated funds, so money not yet committed to
Okay.
specific projects, but still really critical. So think about, clean water systems, economic development, poverty relief in the global south. It's like pulling the foundation out from under community project programs
Hmm.
mid-design. And remember that these are, as we've said, basically formalizing cuts that Doge had already made, and
Hmm.
Doge just froze a bunch of this stuff and
Yeah.
said, "Well, we're not killing exactly, but for now, nothing's going to happen." And
Right.
so all of these programs have collapsed really, and they're just not happening anymore. So overnight, clinics were shuttered, hospitals were closed down. All these projects just ended, and now Congress is seeking to sort of formalize this, but only really the money that hasn't been spent. So there's still a little bit of a grey area here, and this is
Hmm.
something that actually came out during a lot of the debates over this, particularly frustrated Republicans, actually, who were saying there's not enough detail in here. We don't
Hmm.
know what's going to be cut and what's not going to be cut. So
Right.
tell us. And obviously, the government wasn't able to because they haven't done the work, so they don't
Yeah.
know. And in the end, most Republicans held their nose and voted for it anyway. But there was a lot of quite a few disaffected Republicans in there.
Ugh, ugh, ugh. Okay, well, speaking of the hospitals closing, we've also got a health aspect of this,
Yeah.
which is a 900 million cut from global health programs.
Yes, that's right. So this was split between two funding buckets under the 2025 Continuing Appropriations Act. So they supported all sorts of things such as maternal health, pandemic readiness, disease prevention, stuff where the US used to lead globally. Now, not so much.
Okay. Well, and then we have to talk about PEPFAR, and that's President Bush's AIDS relief program that has saved over 25 million lives since it was created. And this is also on the chopping block?
Yes, yes, it absolutely was. So a phenomenally successful program. And when you
Hmm.
talk about international aid, this is always looked to as the poster child of what you can do. And these estimates of 25 million lives saved is quite staggering, isn't it?
Yeah,
But this is AIDS. AIDS kills people. It kills a lot of people.
absolutely.
And this program stopped that happening all over the world in countries that were basically too poor to buy their own very, very expensive anti-HIV medicine and things. So Doge froze the funds for PEPFAR back in January, which caused absolute chaos
I
within the
remember hearing
program.
about that.
It was an absolute scandal. So, public health researcher Brooke Nichols has been tracking the fallout. And so, they came up with a way of measuring and estimating how many people have died since the freeze happened. And
Wow.
they reckon about 80,000 people are now dead who otherwise wouldn't have been dead since
Wow.
that freeze happened back in January.
Oh my
So
gosh.
the House bill, the original bill, did say it was going to pull PEPFAR funding, but this really was a step too far, even for Republicans in the Senate. And so they did strip the PEPFAR cuts out
Okay.
from the final version. But of course, all this damage is already done.
Right.
The people are already dead. So just think about the practicalities of actually restarting some of these programs which have been frozen for so long. And the
Right.
staff aren't still there; they've left.
Right.
The offices, clinics are shuttered. The patients have gone elsewhere, and you've got sort of China and Russia moving aggressively to make political capital out of all of this.
Yes, political capital, something that we all seem to forget that we deal in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so next we have an 800 million cut from refugee and migration assistance, which again seems a little counterintuitive to the big war we're raging over here in this year of ginormous global displacement and everybody kind of bringing this to light and talking about it a lot more than I feel like we've seen in years past.
Yes, absolutely. This is like going to have a huge impact. So the funds were helping manage humanitarian response and resettlement. The administration's rationale for taking them away, that the UN has taken advantage of US generosity. But the thing is, these programs serve real people,
Yeah.
regardless of what the General Assembly and the UN votes on. And let's not forget, these programs, by and large, focus on helping displaced people in the places where they are, which is
Mm-hmm.
an excellent sort of system for stopping people coming to our countries, right? That's what you want. You want people to stay where they are by helping them to stay there. So therefore they don't come and try and cross borders and get into our country. So it's an incredible own goal if you actually want to reduce immigration.
Yeah, that is counterintuitive to say the least. And peacekeeping also didn't escape the axe either. There's 361 million in cuts here.
Yes, that's right, because obviously peacekeeping is a terrible thing. We all want more war. So
I love
the,
war.
who doesn't? Who doesn't love a bit of war? So it includes missions in the Lebanon and the DRC as well, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the official justification for this was failures to contain Hezbollah and allegations of abuse. But the move just weakens UN efforts at a time of rising global conflict.
And just when you thought this couldn't get pettier, we come for Big Bird. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting loses over $1 billion in funding.
Yeah, $1 billion. Yeah, that's a lot of money for public broadcasting, which operates on a shoestring anyway. So Doge called it woke propaganda, and this has been a very common refrain through all of these debates. House Speaker Mike Johnson said that no media organization should get federal money, particularly ones that are pushing this agenda that they disagree with. Critics, including some Republicans, pointed out that local PBS stations also broadcast emergency alerts, which might be useful during, say, a hurricane. And coincidentally, this happened at the time of the earthquake in Alaska, where
Yeah.
these local stations were putting out possible tsunami alerts and things,
Yeah.
and they were saying, well, maybe they won't be able to do that in future, so people are just going to have to cross their fingers.
Right. And I mean, coming on the heels of the big flood in Texas, where everybody was kind of, caught up in a bad spot because they didn't get the warning. That's pretty crazy. Well, talking about all of this makes me need a hug from Elmo.
Yes.
Okay, let's walk through how this bill managed to get over the finish line. It seems like a lot of really bad ideas, and Oscar the Grouch is probably not the only one grouchy about this. So it squeaked through the House, right, with 214 to 212?
Yes, that's right. So four Republicans broke ranks to oppose it. Then came the Senate drama. So after stripping out the PEPFAR cuts, three GOP senators still voted no. You had Collins, Murkowski, and McConnell, surprisingly. And that forced a 50-50 vote, which is a tie, and the Vice President Vance broke that tie, and so the bill passed.
And then McConnell flipped back in favor, right, for the final vote, and that gave them 51. And back in the House, it passed 216 to 213. So it seems like a couple more people fell in line if it looked like it was going to pass. The party line all around, it seems.
Yes, it was absolutely party line with just a few Republicans breaking ranks and coming across to vote with the Democrats, which is very common these days. You're finding that the Republican caucus is surprisingly disciplined. If you remember back to the first Trump administration, they were all over the place. They couldn't pass any votes at all. This time they're really managing to keep people in line. I think that's just a sign, really, the way that the Republican Party has changed and become really the party of Trump.
Yep.
And it is important to note here that this bill passed with a simple majority under fast track rules. But
Yes.
there are a lot of upcoming appropriation bills. Remember, the Congress has to pass 12 bills every year to sort of fund the government and keep the government going. And they need 60 votes in the Senate to do that. So good luck getting Democrat support after this. The Democrats were furious that the Republicans pushed this vote through. There seems to have been some sort of agreement that they wouldn't, and then they reneged on that agreement. And so now the Democrats are vowing to withdraw support for some of these wider budget bills. So it'll be really interesting to watch that drama unfold and see whether the Democrats actually go through with this threat, or whether in the end they decide that that will be more damaging and actually end up coming to some sort of compromise with the Republicans.
Yeah, I'll be really interested to see that, because there was a lot of flack given to the Democrats for not shutting down the government last year, and they thought ultimately it would lead to better results. And here we are, and these are results. I think they call this FAFO, fuck around and find out.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, let's not forget that the Republicans have just shut down the House because they're trying to avoid a vote on releasing the Epstein files. And so Speaker Mike Johnson has said, we're not having any more votes until September. So they've just said, we're going to shut down in one arm of government just to avoid these files actually coming out. So it's great fun, isn't it?
We are definitely living in something. Okay, so what is the bigger picture here? I mean, is this just about trimming the fat, or are we kind of seeing a ginormous global strategy unravel?
Well, that's the $9 billion question, of course. So supporters say fiscal restraint makes us stronger. Very common argument, very reasonable argument, really. But the critics say that we're dismantling the very tools that earned America its global influence, keeps us safe and keeps us prosperous. For many countries, US aid was the reason to stay aligned with us. You take it away and they may look elsewhere. And many already are. As we said, Chinese embassy phones are ringing off the hook all around the globe.
Yeah, it's very interesting having this America First policy in action, and China is still doing China first, but because people have been burned by us and China is offering things, people don't really care if China is getting a lot out of this, as long as they're kind of getting stuff and not working with us anymore. So,
I know. It's
we're
quite
winning.
a remarkable thing. Yeah, it's a remarkable thing. But American foreign policy has managed to make the Chinese seem the reasonable people out there.
Yeah, no, this is crazy. This is crazy.
Quite a feat.
Yes. And meanwhile, back home here, we're ballooning with the deficit, massive tax cuts, lots of crazy, big, beautiful bills with trillions and trillions of dollars of impact. So I don't know if this was really about balancing that budget and more just about cutting aid.
Exactly. It does seem a bit performative. The savings here are a drop in the bucket when compared to the amount that the Republicans have voted to balloon the deficit. As you said, it's trillions and trillions. But they have also promised that this is only the start. This was effectively a test case to see whether they could get these actual votes to actually get this rescission through. They do say that there are more rescissions to come, and much bigger ones as well. But it is still really difficult to see how they can balance the books while continuing to aggressively cut taxes. So as George H.W. Bush learned after his no new taxes moment, which effectively cost him the election when he had to sort of go back and break that promise, there are consequences when you promise magic math to voters.
Yes, there we have it. The Rescissions Act isn't just about dollars, it's about direction. Who we fund, what we value, and how the world does see us.
And if you want to read more about the human cost of budget politics, then check out the full analysis from our partners at IssueVoter.
This has been Beyond the Bill Number. If you learned something today, or you just want to rant about public broadcasting, share this episode, and don't forget to rate and subscribe.
And we'll be back next week. Until then, stay curious and keep looking beyond that bill number.